Welcome everybody to this room. This is Julie, host for this room and club. As we get started, a few Clubhouse pointers again. Go ahead and ping people into the room that you think might be interested. You can use that little plus sign at the bottom to narrow your search to just the people that you think are interested, because to Christine's very good point, if you start pinging too many people, you will get cut off. So in addition to that, be sure to follow me, all our moderators and panelists and co-hosts here today. You'll also want to, check out and follow others in the room. We also invite you to consider following the new Clubhouse members in the room. Those are the individuals with little party hats next to their name or their icon. And we love participation, so please raise your digital hand if you'd like to participate. We'll do our best to get to you. And to support those using closed caption, please state your name when you begin speaking, and then state your name again at the end. So, this is Julie, and then say your part, and then again, this is Julie, and I'm done speaking. That's helpful for those using closed caption again. So, please note, our club is called Consuli Conversations. In addition to this room, we host a data dignity and a long COVID room. You can learn more by following our club. Just tap the little greenhouse at the top and give us a follow. You'll get updates on our upcoming rooms. For any direct questions, comments, feedback, suggestions, if you want to join our panel in the future or have somebody that you want to nominate, my email is in my bio directly. I love hearing from you guys. Please give us a follow on social media as well. That's also in my bio. So for those that don't yet know Consuli, broadly Consuli is a public benefit company with a mission to enable individuals to participate in the data economy. Experts suggest our individual data is worth $20,000 per year. So we do this by operating a marketplace for our members where we become their agent and assemble patients' health records, labs, prescriptions, wearables, quality of life surveys, things like that. Importantly, members receive smart-matched, individualized offers from us for opportunities, including to participate in clinical trials and data trials. There's no cost for anyone to join our movement. You can learn more and sign up to become a member yourself at consuli.net. That's consuli.net. Please become a member. So it's now my pleasure to turn the floor over to our room co-facilitators, Heather Williams and Edie Edens, who will be introducing themselves and our experts. Guests, Heather, over to you.
Thanks so much, Julie. Looking forward to today. Hello, all the clinical trial clubhousers out there. Welcome to our clubhouse for clinical trialists, pharma industry execs, and patients interested in solving burning questions in clinical trials. Just a little bit about me. I come from a background in the data management space as well as the CRO space, and currently work for a company that handles EDC and data management technology in the clinical research space. You can learn more about any of us on the panel here by checking out our profiles. For those who might be newcomers, you can do that by clicking on our faces and read our bios and follow those you're interested in. Gaining insights from experts in a fun and innovative way is what gave rise to the Clinical Trial Clubhouse, and we're really fortunate to work with the Consuli team. They're very innovative, and they enable data and AI for good. And in this case, they're doing this really exciting work in the healthcare and clinical trial space. We know your time's important, so we do try and keep these clubhouse sessions to about an hour or a bit more. And during this time, we'll address what we call our one burning question, which is a new question for every single episode that we do of this room. And this comes from discussions during about the last 15 minutes of the previous room and from other suggestions that we do get from our network. So if you're thinking about other questions related to this industry that you think would be great for a topic for a room, please feel free to bring those forward a little later on. So let's get started. Edie, I'm going to turn things over to you.
Thank you so much, Heather and Julie. So thrilled to be here again for the monthly Clubhouse discussion about clinical trials. My name is Edie Edens, and I am a clinical research compliance consultant with First Class Solutions. I had the unique opportunity, as many of you, to very serendipitously fall into the clinical research world many, many moons ago, and I worked in the academic medical center space, both at the enterprise-wide level and anything from grants, IRB, COI, misconduct, integrity, auditing, you name it, as well as spending a lot of my time deeply embedded in oncology research, and have had the absolute pleasure to move in the consulting space space since 2017, opening the research compliance offering line with first-class solutions. So if any of you guys have any questions for me about that, please definitely reach out. I always love to talk about my work. I couldn't be more passionate, and I just love taking this opportunity each month to bring other like-minded, enthusiastic clinical trial lovers to this room to talk about our one burning question. So thanks so much to the team for setting this up, Arika and others for inviting me to co-mod this discussion. I really, really appreciate it. We're going to open up the discussion on this month's burning question here in just a second. But right before we do that, we always like to say hello to some of the folks we have on the stage with us this morning. So I'm going to begin by asking for just some short introductions, and let's begin with Elizabeth.
So Elizabeth's not here with us. We can start with Christine.
Oh, my bad. Good call. Sorry about that, Christine.
Hey, no problem. I'm glad that someone realized she wasn't here. So my name is Christine von Reisfeld. I'm CEO and founder of People with Empathy, a small nonprofit built to kind of break these silos in healthcare. I'm a patient myself. I've participated in many clinical studies, been dismissed from a lot of trials because of my conditions and medications, but I really see that clinical trials have a positive impact, and I see that the technology and everything that's coming out in innovation can actually help these patient communities. So I am trying to help change the face of clinical trials, and that's it for now.
Thank you so much, Christine. I really appreciate that. I know you have so much to add to this conversation. Let's have Michelle Bautista. Do you mind doing an introduction?
Michelle is also not here, so the next person would be Mark Campbell.
I am just ruining this, guys. I am so sorry. I swore I saw Michelle in here earlier. Mark, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, don't worry. That's great. Thank you. Nice to be here. Mark Campbell, dialing in from London. I'm a management consultant. I work been in the industry for 20 plus years, but I specialise in patient access sites and really in the decentralised clinical trial phase at the moment. For me, super passionate about how we make healthcare an option to patients. So I spend a lot of time working on solutions to essentially make clinical trials more of a primary solution for patients rather than a last resort. So that's my space. Nice to meet you all.
Thank you so much for that introduction. And now, and I've double checked you're here, Amy Sitnick, would you please give us an introduction of yourself?
Sure thing. So, yep, I'm here. I'm Amy Sitnick. I head marketing at a company called Greenfire. Greenfire is a technology company that got its start in patient payments, but we do logistics for clinical trials, site payments, as well as budgeting. And I also sort of accidentally fell into the clinical trial world, but I've been very involved with B2B financial services marketing over the years, and we at Greenfire sort of see ourselves as a fintech that just happens to sit within the clinical trial world. I've been here for almost about 3 years, and I just love this industry and being involved and speaking with so many people who are doing really great work.
Thank you so much, Amy. I think our last introduction, and please correct me if I get it wrong again, guys, is Joe. Would you please give us your short intro?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Joe Gow. I'm a senior solution specialist with Greenfire, the company that Amy works with. My role is I work with academic medical centers, universities, and clinical research sites in the U.S. and soon, hopefully, in Europe. My background is I've now worked with Greenfire for almost 3 years, but prior to that, I live here in Charleston, South Carolina, and I worked at our academic medical center for 15 years in the Department of Medicine at the Medical University of South Carolina as Director of Research and Operations in our Department of Medicine. And prior to that, I worked in D.C. and headquarters for the VA Research Office, the Cooperative Studies Program, which is the VA's national multi-site phase 3 clinical trial program. And I worked there for 12 years, so in total, about 30 years in the space. And I've volunteered for actually 6 clinical trials myself, including the currently ongoing COVID study from Johnson & Johnson. I'll stop there.
That's amazing, Joe. Thank you so much. You're going to have so much experience to add to this conversation. I'm so glad that all of you guys are here. So again, this is Edens, and we're going to get right into the burning question today. So I'm just going to introduce it. I'm sure some of you guys have seen it. Thanks so much again to all the participants for the introductions. Our burning question for today is, how do we bring visibility to trial participation to patients interested in clinical trials as a treatment option early in their disease progression or for non-chronic health issues? And so with that question on the table, we're going to start with our panelists, and then we will open up to everyone who's here in the room with us. Again, please remember to raise your hand if you'd like to be called up to the stage, so that when we get to that section, Julie can start bringing people up. So we're going to go ahead and start with, I know we've had a few pivots on speakers here. I'm going to ask if maybe Christine could start us, if you don't mind. I know she always has much to say, and I really want to hear, because this is a patient-centric burning question, right? So I really want to hear from that patient perspective. I think that's how we frame this conversation.
And thank you so much for bringing me up to answer that. And, I've said it in this room many times. I think that clinical trials right now has a very negative connotation in the patient communities. And I see clinical trials and the people that participate in them as heroes. And we don't have drugs now without participants in those clinical trials. But what I think we really need to do is educate people on what clinical trials are. We need to be asking people to sign up for the option of clinical trials when you enroll in a healthcare system. I think a lot of the problems that we experience is that we get to the patients with clinical trials when they're at their last ditch option. They've tried everything failed, which then also sometimes takes them out of the eligibility for a trial. And so if we were able to ask, when you are enrolling in a healthcare system, this is what a clinical trial is. These are your treatment options if you do happen to get sick, and what would you like to choose? I think that could change things immediately. But that's just my thought and my perspective. And I'm Christine, so I want to hear what everyone else has to say.
I love that, Christine. Hi, everyone. It's Heather here again. I agree with you 100%, and I think when we think about how do we make sure that people understand what a clinical trial is, the education piece of this can go all the way back to thinking about schools and children and consulting with parents when they have a child. Children get sick too, and there's a lot about this, and that's such a hard demographic to recruit for, that there's a lot we could do better. Maybe I can throw this over to you, Mark, if you don't mind jumping in with your thoughts.
Yeah, thanks so much. I'm going to build on what Christine said, which is that Christine was saying you've got to involve patients into the kind of the clinical trial space during their signing with the healthcare system. But you've got to go back a little bit further. Without healthcare systems being engaged in research, the patients will never get there. And I think that's the key thing. What we're trying to deal with here is essentially a marketplace issue. So much like Kayak and the TripAdvisors of the world have tried to solve in the travel world, which is there are patients with patient needs, there are healthcare providers, and there are clinical trial sponsors, and there's research sites. Until we find a single mechanism to join those up and layered virtual and decentralized trials, I think having clinical trials as a primary option for patients, not a last ditch, is a dream. So that's it for me. If we want to make research an option for patients as part of a healthcare system, we have to join up all the dots. It's a very complicated system, particularly when you scale it to a global stage. And technology and data, in my mind, is one of the greatest options for us to solve that problem.
Thank you so much, Mark. I really appreciate that input. Okay.
No, that was Mark Campbell. I finished speaking. I must learn some basic etiquette.
I know, it's hard. We get kind of in here. This is Edens. I so appreciate that, Mark. I was just going to cap you off and help you out there, so apology for the overlap. I really like what we're bringing up here in terms of the different, I think, avenues in which we address this, right? So we've had education, which we've discussed previously, and I found it to be a really entertaining conversation. We're talking about the tech focus, right? The other ways that other industries have addressed this. And for me, because I am very open, I come from a family of healthcare providers and have spent most of my time in healthcare facilities in my career, I think of it from the mindset of both, of how do we enable a technology for educating our healthcare providers to enable them to then pass that education on at whatever demographic they interact with. And I say this because it may not be true in your large academic medical centers per se that are doing tons of research, but when you move into more rural healthcare spaces, they are so focused on clinical care that often clinical trials or clinical research are seen as a last-ditch effort or a last line for a fatal illness. They're not seen as the first step in the process or something that's considered early on in the care. And so from that perspective, I think we could utilize a better education and more technology to take the burden off those providers and help enable them to start that conversation sooner. So with that, I would love to then hear from Amy Sidnick.
Yeah.
Would you be able to give some of your perspective there?
For sure. I was hoping you were going to come to me next, because I feel like that's really, we've been speaking with a lot of patient advocacy organizations and just pharma companies and sites, and everyone says you have to go beyond being, more transactional clinical research and build relationships with different communities, whether it's ethnic backgrounds or folks, in the lupus community, such as Christine, but part of that is, really, creating awareness that clinical trials, are part of healthcare, overall, and helping to, create that, that broader awareness ahead of someone even being ill, so I think for us, one of the ways that we've been involved in doing that is working with Syscripts, and we're a sponsor of their patient perceptions and insight survey this year. I know they have over 11,000 patients that have taken their survey, and the results will be coming out in mid to late September and October. But they really dig into, and they ask patients all around the world, are you aware of clinical trials? Have you participated in them? If you have, what was your experience? What were the burdens that were on you? And, would you participate in them again? So they're taking the angle, and doing some, some advocacy work around, just creating the awareness around clinical trials as treatment options, and helping to sort of understand what are the blockers that could potentially, prevent people from participating in those studies. So all of these things, I think we need to think about in a cascading manner, creating this high-level awareness, building relationships with organizations and communities, and then, embedding, similar to how other folks in the panel were saying that, you embed the clinical trial discussion alongside of care, so that way people are presented with all of the different types of options that are available to them when they're considering what the best course of action is for them if they are looking at a treatment, or a medical device, or, what they're going to need for getting, well. So that's my thoughts. I'm Amy, and I'm done. But I would love to turn it over to Joe, if we could, or expand on that.
Sure. Hi, this is Joe. One thing I thought of when tech was mentioned, again, coming from academic medical center, certain EMR systems, for example, Epic, have the ability to flag whether a participant or a patient actually would be interested in clinical trials. So there are those structural things potentially through an EMR system where you have the opportunity for the physician and the provider to explain during a basic encounter and explain what a clinical trial is and how the ability to enable tech to help be able to identify those folks who might be interested in enrolling as healthy volunteers or otherwise. But that's an opportunity to provide the elevator speech about what a clinical trial is. It would be very complex to try to explain what a clinical trial is. So you kind of have to be succinct with that and array any fears that they may have and kind of explain the benefits from a healthcare providing standpoint, additional care, additional oversight, but there's a lot involved. There could be, there could be potential risks as well. So it's a complex topic, but I would just say overall, perhaps some of our EMR systems could do a good job supporting the ability to identify volunteers. I'll stop there.
I'm curious, this is Edie, Joe, if you've seen, because I've seen the availability to do this in EMR, multiple EMR systems, what I have not seen when we get away from, research in-depth organizations like an academic medical center, like a research site, when we're in some of those more rural spaces like I was talking about that aren't quite as familiar, they don't use it as quite of a frontline treatment, are the providers themselves comfortable with what you just said needs to happen, right? Like even if they saw it in the EMR, or they actually, is that a part of their routine interaction with their patient population? That's the part, the missing piece that I have not seen, but I'd be very interested if others have in fact seen that. This is Edie, I'm done speaking.
Can I hop in here? This is Christine. I think that before we focus on the EMR, because that is a mess itself, and really, we don't even have interoperability for a lot of our EMR. So I think that focus is there and could be there. But I think what we really need to focus on, and I'll go back to what Amy said, is the patient communities. You have leaders and patient communities who have the ability to connect with their communities in a way that as industry we don't have, but we don't use them, and I hate the word use, but we don't incorporate them into this process. And I think that's a huge part of it. If you're looking at awareness and education, it's really involving those people. And I had some great success with a company, Sanguine, because they did a direct-to-consumer type marketing with clinical trials, and it was really involved me. They had people who reached out to me, who talked to me, that could distinguish what the parts of the trial were and really talk that out with me. So I think really, again, going back to that education awareness, even starting as young as children, when our president came out and spoke about clinical trials, that messed up everything that we have all been working on. And so really, I think it's just kind of correcting those mistakes at this point and then focusing on the tech once we've got everybody on board. But that's just my perspective, and I'm Christine.
Oh, go ahead. Mark, go ahead. I was just about to actually call on you. This is Edie. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to go a little bit where the bottlenecks are. So I used to love Pfizer's strap line of the patient is waiting. And even if you took the United States as a single country, the regulations and the state laws prevent patient sharing. So from a sponsor, if I'm a sponsor and I want to gain greater access or give greater access to my clinical trials, I'm laden with regulation. Number one is I need a principal investigator. That principal investigator needs to be licensed in that state. Then I need people, other healthcare professionals in that state to share their patients with me. Because the way the regulation is set up, what I'm not going to do is put 700 investigators across Texas in order to capture the whole population. I think that's the key thing to unlocking the potential of patient access to research is we have to remove state borders, purely from the United States perspective, the litigation and the insurance restrictions, and then we need data sharing. And I say that's important because I worked on a very number of ulcer colitis and UC Crohn's studies, and the patients are in need, but a lot of the specialists aren't engaged in research because researchers are distracted to their core business of making money by managing their patients, but they're also unwilling to release their patients to other treating physicians who are part of clinical trials. In some feedback was concern of patient care, would they lose their patients? So I think we have a lot of this ability with EMR. I know it's the mess, Christine, I agree, totally agree. But the patients are there, the patients are waiting. Even if you light up the healthcare system, you have to deal with the GCP and its antiquateness. You have to deal with inter-country borders, such as states, and how the overall regulation allows that free flow of patients. And that's what decentralized trials are facing the roadblock today, is we want virtual trials, we want to decentralize, but it's driving up cost and it's competing with the existing regulation. So I think that's an area that's probably a huge area to unpack. And there are efforts going on with such as the Trials at Home initiative in Europe, GCP going through a review, but it's not systemic enough to unlock the bottlenecks that, and this is a hugely complex area. So I just wanted to kind of add that into what's being said. I think there's a lot of areas that we have addressed to move it through. And that's Mark, and I'm done speaking.
Thank you so much, Mark. This is Edie. I was going to say, I'm very curious, and I think we have some questions about GDPR and how, are we in a system in the U.S. that is better or worse in dealing with GDPR in exactly those situations? But I do want to ground the conversation because I know we're really trying to focus on how do we reach the patients in this particular conversation. And I wonder, Joe, I was going to say, I know you've been clicking. I wonder if you had something you wanted to add to the conversation?
No.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Different Joe. Sorry, I should have used last name. My apologies. Joe Dustin.
Joe.
Yes, there's another one of you, Joe Dustin. This is Evie. I'm done speaking. Thank you.
I have a few minutes in between calls. I apologize. But yeah, thanks for calling me up. My name is Joe. Full disclosure, I'm the head of clinical innovation at Bristol Myers Squibb. So I come from the pharma perspective, and I'm sorry for that. The world of clinical research as a care option is kind of our world. Most of our trial participants come from referrals from their doctors after a not so great diagnosis of a disease for which there are a number of drugs out there, and sometimes there's only one drug. And from our perspective, we do a lot of different outreach campaigns, but yeah, we don't get recruitment from ads, right? We're getting it from a lot of different ways. Finding the patient at the right time is so key, and this is why relationships, I think, with sites are very important, especially some of the big academic institutions around the world. You want to have great relationships with those sites, which is why when you ever hear about a sponsor of choice initiative, it really matters in those situations, because then you're going to get the key opinion leaders and those folks at those hospitals and at those academic research centers that are actually willing to suggest clinical trials, because if it's a pain in the neck to work on them, they're not going to bring it up. Now, we have the patient at the center of the whole thing at the beginning. We always want to, and they always tell us that we all want to make sure we make the right choice regardless, especially if there's no other option. A clinical trial is a perfect suggestion. However, I find a couple things struggling. I don't have a solution to say, what to your one burning question. I'm just giving you a current state of kind of where I see the world after being in pharma now for a year and the clinical technology world for 18 years. The problem, I think, we can do EHR matching all day. We can find patients in different site networks. We can look at real world data and utilize different site networks there, whether it's community cancer centers or big hospitals or things around the world, state government run health systems or whatnot. But part of the problem is I'll use it. Maybe it's not appropriate, but I'll use a sales analogy. Closing the deal with the patient is the hardest part. Getting them that last mile to get that behavioral flip in their mind that I actually want to enroll them. So they talk with their family, they make the right decision. Does their doctor think it's a good idea? For whatever reason, that is, I think, the last mile that is the biggest gap. Like I said, we can find the patients all day. And a number of trials that we, and I know some of my other colleagues and other companies have the same problem. When you go into feasibility and you start to launch your trial, you find study teams that say, yeah, we know where all the patients are, we should be able to get recruitment, no problem. And then nothing happens. And why? They know where the patients are, but they don't know why they are or are not going to actually take that last step, sign the consent, and get involved. And that, I think, is part of the issue. And when you talk about clinical research as a care option and the one burning question of how do we get to them early enough in their disease progression and diagnosis, I think that's part of the behavioral part of this whole process is convincing them it's a good idea for them and that their doctor's behind them and they have some other support mechanisms to get through, and it's going to be a good experience. This is Joe, and I'm done speaking.
Hey Joe, it's Amy from Greenfire. I couldn't agree more. I mean, if you're having to educate someone about what a clinical trial is at the same time that they're having to make a decision about their personal health, it's too late. I think that the trust has to be, built, much earlier in their life, so that way they're much more comfortable when it comes to that time that they're making really serious about decisions about their health. And Christine, I know this is Amy. I'm done.
I'm sitting here, and Joe, I am so glad to see you in this room. I know that we've all had these conversations many times, and I think what we don't realize is that the communities talk. The patient communities, regardless of the regulations that we all have in place in the industry, the patients don't have those same regulations in their own groups. And when they're looking at clinical trials and talk about clinical trials as this last-ditch option and as not as this empowering thing that they can do for their community, that loses a lot. And, I'll say it here. My physician, I don't want him to talk about clinical trials with me. I have limited time with them. That is not what I'm looking at. I'm looking at my quality of life and how it can help me in this moment. I think the clinical trial discussions need to be happening elsewhere. And like Amy, you mentioned, when you're in the middle of an illness, that is not the time to bring up a clinical trial. It should be done when you're first diagnosed. And I do have two of my friends that have joined the stage, Sophia and Estella, and I don't know if we're ready to go to the audience yet, but they have some perspectives on patient communities as well, and I've seen their mics flash. So just wanted to echo everything you said, Joe and Amy, and thank you for being here.
Yeah, it's great. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Christine. I was going to say, I wonder if it would be, and I'll definitely throw this to Julie and Heather to make the final call, but I wonder if, since we're at the top of the hour, it would make sense to do a quick room reset. And then I know, like Christine mentioned, this is Edie, sorry. Like Christine mentioned, that I had seen Sophia, Daniel, and a few others with your mics flashing, and we'll get right to you after we do the room reset. Would that work for folks? This is Edie, I'm done speaking.
Hi, Edie. Thanks so much. This is Julie. Hi, everyone. This is Julie, project manager at Consuli, host for this room. I hope everyone is enjoying the conversation. I just want to take a quick moment to reset our room, share a little bit about Consuli's mission. We are a public benefit company working to create a marketplace where we deal individuals like you and me into the data economy and help make medicine better by smart matching patients with clinical trials that are right for them. We're creating a movement, and there's no cost to join us, so we hope you will check us out and sign up. You can find our website, links to our socials in our bio, and my direct email is in my bio. I love hearing from you guys. So thanks so much for joining us. I'm going to pass the mic back to Heather. This is Julie, and I'm done speaking.
Thanks, Julie, so much. This has been great. I know we have a few folks on the stage that have been wanting to chime in. I think Daniel, Sophia, Estella, Bakash, all sort of in a row. Maybe we can start with Daniel and go from there, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Heather. Can you all hear me all right?
We got you.
So thank you, Edie, for the invite. First of all, I miss you. We got to catch up as a side note. But this is Daniel. I'm the CEO at Macro Trials. I'm also a founding board member for a 503B charitable organization called Clinical Trials in Color, where the vision is to bridge empowered communities of color with clinical trials. Now, this burning question is definitely an important point of conversation. I started my career at an academic medical center as a stroke and neuroacute study coordinator. And if you can imagine, these conversations around clinical trial participation were happening within 2 hours of a patient having collapsed in their home and being admitted to the ICU. And so in that high stress situation, oftentimes we were having conversations with folks who didn't have the luxury to know about clinical trials ahead of that crisis. So, that was my entryway into clinical research. And one of the things that was on my mind as I heard y'all talking was, what about the communities of color who don't equitably have access to care in academic medical centers? That key opinion leader who is oversubscribed, and the clinical trial already is a burden, and their clinic is so heavily impacted, and the patients that seek the care of the KOL are already already privileged to have the type of healthcare that underserved communities don't have. And so one of the things that I'm very passionate about is how do we close the health outcomes gap that we're seeing, the big disparity from communities of color in the conversation of clinical trials, and enabling greater access at their point of care, which is oftentimes very far removed from an academic medical center. Again, as a side note, I mentioned I'm the CEO at Macro Trials, and that's exactly the solution that we're trying to figure out how to best implement, going directly into the community practitioners. And, I wanted to be the voice in the room that brought that angle into the conversation, because it's important to remember that the vast majority of the population in the U.S. are not receiving their care in the orbit of academic medical centers. So again, this is Daniel, CEO at Macro Trials, and I'm done talking.
Can I step in really quick and say, Daniel, this is Christine. I used to be with a health maintenance organization, and clinical trials were not offered at all until I went to Stanford. And so that is an important point that we have to realize when we're looking at recruiting for clinical trials, is that most people aren't even aware. But anyways, I'm done. Thanks.
This is Edie. Thanks so much, Christine and Daniel. So glad to have you a part of this conversation. I know it hasn't been a good time slot for you, so I'm really glad to have you here, because I can't think of a research site that I know cares more about really touching on the disparities in healthcare and clinical trials and making sure that we put our patients first and foremost. I would love to hear from Sophia. I know you have been blinking for a while, and we are taking our time getting to you. Would you like to speak? This is Edie. I'm done speaking.
Hi, Edie, and hi, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity. And yes, I've been wanting to come in because the conversation was really exciting. And I thought to myself, I don't have that kind of hands-on experience. I'm working at FPIA, the European Federation of Pharmaceutical Industries. So I'm coming from a very European perspective, and I'm responsible for patient engagement at FPIA. And I wanted to come back a little bit and zoom in a little bit on the patient experience part with clinical trials, because I've heard patients sharing their experiences at conferences, and I don't think it was always a positive experience. And this leads back a little bit to the closing the deal and how we communicate with the patients who are about to enroll in a clinical trial or are enrolled already. Because I think, as you say, patients talk, and we're missing a very simple and important thing, I think, oftentimes in the industry, and that's just checking in with the patient and asking them if they are comfortable with what's happening and how it's happening. And catering to personal needs in a clinical trial would be so important. So I've heard patients speaking about clinical trials that were raising their hopes. They had better results, better outcomes, and then suddenly the trial was stopped. And nobody said why. Nobody gave them more information. So, basically they felt that they were led on, there was hope, but then nothing happened. So I think it's extremely important to loop back to the patients, to make them understand what's going on in a clinical trial. And obviously, to Mark's point, I think that projects like IMI Trials at Home are so important, and it's just starting out, but it is meaning to inform patients about what clinical trials are, how can you enroll, what it means, and remote clinical trials and how they work. So I think that to the GDPR point, that's also a very important one. And in Europe, I think we are very aware that GDPR can affect how we do research. And if people can withdraw consent, then that's going to have a very, very huge impact on clinical trials and how we deal with the results. So, this was just me. Sorry, there were many scattered thoughts that came to my mind listening to the conversation, but it's been really exciting. And I'm Sophia, and I'm done speaking. Thank you.
Can I chime in really quick and say that the GDPR, now in the United States, you have California that is going to be enacting the California Consumer Protection Act, which is similar to GDPR. So I think we can play around with things here in Silicon Valley. But anyways, I know that Estella was next, and I'm Christine, done. Estella, are you there?
Yes, thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having us here today. I love this discussion, and I do have to comment on this. So the academic medical centers are most likely to bring up these clinical trials to the patients. However, not all providers will bring up clinical trials, and I don't think that all patients want to hear about clinical trials when getting their care. I think, it is best to meet the members of the community, especially the minority community members in their community, with people that look like them and that they already trust. And having these discussions prior to getting them the diagnosis will prepare our communities to ask and inquire their providers when the time comes. I also think that it is important, like Sophia said, it's not just about engaging and educating and having the community members participate, but it's also closing the loop. It's making sure that once an individual participates in a clinical trial, that they are given the opportunities, that they are supported, and that they are given results at the end, or if a clinical trial is stopped, that they are notified. It's about closing the loop. And I think, with the engagement, participating, educating, and connecting with the community. And this is Estella, and I'm done speaking.
Thank you so much, Estella. This is Edie. I wanted to give Christine and then perhaps Priya a chance to speak as well. I know they just joined the room and they might have some thoughts to add to this great conversation. Christine, would you be interested in speaking next? This is Edie and Ben.
Absolutely. Thank you, Edie. This is Christine Naro. I'm a CRA for a medical device company, and I used to be a coordinator. I'm also a brand ambassador for Latinas in Clinical Research. And my perspective from being a site coordinator, I just have to echo what Sophia said, is that one question that came up almost every time I saw a patient and the study was ending is, I want to know about the results. I want to know what the data says about my condition and, how this medication is going to help. So if there's anything that I can say here, it's going to be that patients want to know what the results are. Thank you, and I'm done speaking.
Hi, this is Mark, and maybe that's, if you haven't touched that one burning question, is maybe a future one burning question is, what happens when it's all done? Like, where do patients go? And there's lots of topics. I won't take us down the rabbit hole of post-trial access and all those wonderful things. But I think at the end of the trial and beyond is a super question for this forum to explore. And I'm Mark. I'm done talking.
And I'm going to add one thing to you, Mark. This is Christine. I was just going, oh God, and now I just completely, Syscript, sorry. Amy mentioned them earlier, and there is that company. They are trying to show the results. I actually work with them as a reviewer for their things, and they're really trying to make it easier for patients to understand those results as we, end these trials. But there are some people out there, I just think the recognition and awareness of what they're doing is not quite there. So I'll pass it on to Priya, and I'm done.
Thank you, Christine. First of all, love this room. This is my very first time here. Thank you, everyone, for this amazing discussion. I just came to say hi and learn from the community. I'm a product owner for a clinical data capture platform. And the one burning question that I am learning more about every day is what is that thing that would keep a patient motivated to be part of a trial? And through my discussions, I've learned that a high motivation factor for a lot of patients is that they would like to give back to the community in some way and help others who are going through the same struggles and through the same journey. So I echo what Estella and Sophia had to say, that they would like to see what their participation have been able to do for the whole community and how many lives were they able to impact through that. And the other thing is, what have we learned from a clinical trial which would make a future trial better in terms of how the trial is designed? So, yeah, those are some of the things that I'm looking at right now. Thank you, and I'm done speaking.
Can I piggyback on you, Priya, really quick and say that
Go ahead.
as a patient, right, I do have that altruistic view. I want to help everyone, but I also suffer with my own quality of life. And I think as we're looking at clinical trials, you have to also, aside from that altruistic point of view, you also have to look at how these people live. And, I look put together, but I live on Social Security, disability, and I struggle. And I would love if I was participating in a trial, for them to help me with my regular quality of life. And I don't know. That's just one of the things that I think. And I'm done. I know my patients in the room, Estella, and can back me up on that one. But quality of life to me is so much more important than the altruistic view, because at a certain point, that altruistic view goes down the tube when you're not feeling good. So I'm done.
100% agree with that. I just did not mention that because others had already brought that point, and that's the first thing that we will look at for sure. Thanks.
We're seeing, at least where we sit, and since we handle a lot of patient reimbursement and stipends, a rise in stipends, and this is Amy from Greenfire. An increase in looking at things that may not have been traditionally reimbursable, such as childcare and elder care, even pet care. I mean, certain sponsors are being very progressive in terms of what they are providing for, in terms of the patient quality of life or the participant quality of life when they're involved in a clinical trial. There was one thing that I did want to pick up on, and it's something that I struggle with, and because I do believe in terms of talking and building trust and building education with patient communities, I just am very concerned that it can't just be in a vacuum, of just talking about clinical trials. It should be in the context of healthcare, and clinical trials is one element. Because I want people not to feel like they are being potentially taken advantage of. If someone's coming in to advertise for a clinical trial, yet they're part of if it's in the context of a church, or a community outreach organization. And so I just these are people that have historically been preyed upon perhaps in the past and have not had, perhaps resources to go to other types of, leading academic medical centers. And yet here's someone coming in and saying they're recruiting for a clinical trial, but it's out of left field. And that's why I think that the work that Syscript does, and that a lot of, sponsors and local governments and sites are doing in terms of education about clinical trials, but also in the context of healthcare and treatment options, is so important to build trust. So that way, underserved communities just don't feel like they're being preyed upon again. So this is Amy. I just wanted to add that.
I love you, Amy.
I love you.
Michael, did I see your mic flash? Did you want to jump in here?
Yeah, Heather. I'll tell you what. This is Michael Young, and I'm one of the original organizers of this clubhouse room, and we're just so excited to see the interaction and the discussion here with all the new players as well. So thank you to all for that. The one comment I wanted to make here was really around the fact that all of you have been discussing really what's happening to patients as they are introduced to the possibility of a clinical trial, the building of trust, the information that's shared with them, the closing of the deal, etc. What is really, really apparent here is that anyone who is going to be working in the field of patient recruitment and assisting with the top of the funnel, if you will, has got to understand that this decision about joining a clinical trial these days, because of the complexity of the trials, the number of clinical endpoints that are being gathered, etc., requires navigation. It requires a concierge approach to this, and we need to be much more, as I call it, whole patient focused on this. It's not just about whether or not they meet the inclusion-exclusion criteria, but it's whether or not they can actually get to the clinical site. It's whether or not they have to work while they're in the clinical trial. And because these trials often go on for a number of years, it's trying to understand what do they expect to get out of these trials? And as Mark brought up, which I thought was brilliant, is what happens after. It's one thing to just get a thank you, which you now even see in some of the advertising. I note that Bristol Myers has done that pretty openly and prominently, but it's got to be more than that, because people are contributing real life data to this, and they need to know where their data goes, what it's being used for, and what role did they play. So there's the altruistic, there's the, if you will, the commercial piece of this, but there's a very real personal construct that has to be developed with engaging people in clinical trials. So just my observations from the conversation, and again, thank you. This is Michael, and I'm complete.
Michael, that was great. It was Christine, but there's also Tiffany on the stage that has come up as well. And Tiffany, I would love to hear your perspective on this as well.
Yeah, Christine, it's been a while, so it's nice to see you and some other friendly faces up on this stage. So for those who don't know me, I'm Tiffany Brazil. I'm an internal medicine resident. I'm also a clinical outcomes researcher, and I have participated in the development of clinical trial protocols as well as in the recruitment process. And I would say from my experiences, sometimes patients are recruited to trials because they can't afford what is the standard of care, and having opportunities for them to try other medications or interventions that would be provided to them at no cost, and they might even get other sorts of stipends or benefits from the trial, as well as more clinical care than what their insurance may allow. Many of these patients may not be insured. At my academic medical center, we have a large catchment area, and a lot of patients get referred to our facility. So, in terms of reducing disparities, sometimes clinical trials become a very viable option to provide care where no other options may exist. And being able to have that conversation with a patient can be very valuable. I think there needs to be a lot of transparency into the risks and benefits, what sort of information is going to be collected on them, how it's going to be used, what benefits they may experience in the short term and long term, and then what those implications are for other people like them. And I think the more that is a conversation and a dialogue, the more likely you are to have willing participants, as opposed to patients who might sign up finding it too intense, or that they're not aligned with their goals or their values, or it's just not feasible, and then you get this high attrition rate, a lot of patients who are lost to follow up, and that also affects the results of a trial. And so I found that to be really instrumental. And then the more invasive any sort of trial might be, whether it's the number of touch points or the type of intervention, again, it needs to be a shared decision like any medical decision for a patient, to really ensure that they're getting the most out of the trial and they fully understand what comes with that. So those are my thoughts. This is Tiffany, and I'm complete.
Hi, it's Mark. Tiffany and just Michael, I think the days of a bums on seats approach to filling clinical trial space is over, and I totally agree. We need to provide adequate time for patients to reflect. There are parts of the world where family are really important, and that opportunity to go home and discuss it with family. And I've always found through data and analytics from working with some of the largest patient recruitment organizations, speed to randomization is your greatest indication of the patient leaving. So I just found what you said, Michael and Tiffany, really resonates, and I truly believe that we need to avoid speed to fill seats and replace it with informed and committed participants, and that's only going to be found through education and dialogue.
Hi, Mark. Can I jump in real quick here on that? Because I think that's a great point, and I work on the clinical data side of things. And when we introduced e-consent that allowed for remote patient consent, it's been really interesting to see how the sponsors and the CROs that we work with have integrated a lot more comprehensive information into their consent process. So it's not just I'm reading all the things that could happen to me and I'm consenting to the study, but it's actually information that's being focused not just on the patient, but on their caregiving team that they'll have and their partners and their families. And being able to sit back, read that at home, go through that, have a way to interact and ask ask questions about their consent has made a significant difference for the clients we work with in terms of their ability to recruit patients. So I love that you brought that point up, and I think it really, what we've seen early days, but what we've seen in terms of integrating a more sort of widespread approach of information, not just been impactful in the recruitment with the studies we work on. I'm Heather, I'm done speaking.
Hi Heather, I love that, and I'd love to learn more. Because I'm assuming if a patient is home, they have more time to sit and reflect. You can put more media around what it needs to be part of the clinical trials. Because patient retention in research can be easier because they're accessing a standard of care that would not otherwise motivations are staying different to those perhaps in Western world of being able to easily information around it. I'd love.
Okay, this is Christine again, and I love the conversation so far, but I want to know if I can pivot for a second and really talk about the collective intelligence and the data, right, that we have in these patient communities. And I think one of the key points when we're looking at clinical trials and results for a community is really educating that community around the value of their collective data as well, and really building clinical trials in with the communities so that they understand them better, that they know their options, but they also know what that data is worth together. Because individually our data is really, it's not much, but together that data can actually come up with the cures. So that's, Christine, my perspective. Did I silence everyone?
I wasn't sure.
You stunned us with your brilliance, as usual. You leave the speeches every time.
I wouldn't go that far, but...
Did anyone else have a comment on the panel that wanted to jump in, or do we have some of our the guests here in the room who wanted to provide their thoughts on everything?
Yeah, I just would like to come in for 1 second. I love Mark's comment because I think clinical trial recruitment shouldn't be about getting bumps on the seats. It should be also about managing the people who are participating as human beings, and I think understanding their needs and their priorities while enrolling in a clinical trial or during a clinical trial is so important. Many times pharma companies are complaining that people are dropping off from clinical trials, and surprise, surprise, nobody ever asked them, how are you? So I think that sometimes things are just very simple and easy, and I know that data and digital is going to save us, but first of all, we are humans. So I think that's a very important aspect.
Sophia, this is Michael, and I want to reinforce what it is that you're saying, because there's something very critical here. The user interface and the user experience that patients have with their trials has everything to do with how they will speak about the product later. It's everything that has everything to do with the pride that they take in the work, in the effort that they're making, because many of these patients are at first seeking a possible cure, but in the long haul, they build a relationship with the trialists, as well as the site, as well as the experimental product that's being developed. And one thing that often gets forgotten is that with most of these trials, there's going to be post-marketing data collected. There will be data trials, which may not require that the individual actually submit themselves for research, but can participate in providing anything from ePro to real-world evidence at a later time. And so managing the relationship that the patients have with the trial is a key element to that. So thanks for bringing that up, Sophia. This is Michael, and I'm done.
This is Edie. I'm hoping you all can hear me. I apologize. I've had to transition to my car.
We hear you.
Great. Thank you. So I wanted to add in here because for me, I love hearing all the ideas, but then I also hit this wall as a consultant who the clients expect me to come up with a solution once they present their problem to me, right? And what I'm hearing is, and I think think this is not going to be a shock to anyone. This is not a moment of brilliance for me. But there's a lot of different ways we need to go about addressing and attacking the lack of, patient advocacy and knowledge. And that's not to say it's not out there, but to greaten the impact and magnify it. And I'm wondering, we've talked about education, we've talked about tech, we've talked about some the approach to the patient once on trial, right? We've covered some fantastic ideas. It's been just a phenomenal panel of folks. But one thing I haven't heard come up that I'm a bit curious about is the role of the patient recruitment firm, right? Because we've all seen organizations that are out there right now who are solely focused on recruiting patients for clinical trials, and many of them have a mission or a vision that is very centered toward patient advocacy. And what I continue to hear when I get into conversations with these folks is that while they may utilize very specific to a specific trial, specific sponsor, Facebook groups, Google ads, etc., what they find globally across therapeutic areas that continues to be a driving point and a driving force for their success, and not only patient advocacy and engagement, but actual retention, is creating relationships with patient advocacy groups tied to the most common therapeutic areas, right? And so I'm super curious to know what folks think of recruitment firms in our space as it relates to getting patients more aware and comfortable, if we think they're, good, bad, ugly, somewhere in between, and if you agree, if you have worked with them, that these are some of the milestones working with the patient advocacy groups, as well as, society groups, right? So things like socials and media, Facebook, Google ads, are those a meaningful way? Is that working from the patient's perspective? I'm Edie, and I'm done.
So, to this industry, I started going to a lot of conferences that were about rare disease, drug development. A lot of, CROs were out there. And when I went to each of the booths, I approached everybody at the booths and I said, I'm Christine, you don't have to sell me on anything. I'm a patient and I want to know how you're including patients. And a lot of the CROs told me they don't need patient input, that they have everything that they needed already. So it was very interesting. And now I'm seeing CROs starting patient advocacy groups and other things that are getting them involved. But I'm not so sure it's always done in the right way. So for me, that's just my perspective as someone kind of in this industry but patient side of really seeing that active involvement. So just a comment. I don't know what any of you are working on, but I'd love to see more active involvement with patients in a real way.
Thanks, Christine. I really appreciate that. I was going to say, I think there's a big difference between, for me, this is Edie, CROs who sell their services to include patient recruitment versus organizations who are not a CRO and their sole purpose is patient recruitment. And I'll just park that right there. Thank you.
Hi, it's Mark. Maybe I can jump in on that. And having been in a number of dedicated patient recruitment organizations, I'll be a bit controversial. I don't think the word patient recruitment is the right description of these organizations. They're patient marketing firms who attract patients into a funnel. Okay, the job of recruitment is the human relationship between nurse, coordinator, physician, and that patient. So, does Facebook work? Yes. Digital advertising has been absolutely instrumental to getting COVID patients into trials, hands down. So, digital space recruitment is important. I think what we have to do is see these organizations for what they are. They are for-profit, large volume, bumps on seats organizations. There's the next stage is how do you tele-screening to cut down the volume that makes it to the site. But ultimately, when that patient arrives at site, the patient recruitment firm has no control over their experience, their care, their their support, and often a patient recruitment firm traction into the funnel, like Michael mentioned, and the strategies that we put in place to create an enriched patient population. And I always say this is, we're not out here to find people who meet the criteria. we're looking for people who meet the criteria, but are a good candidate for research. What we need to do to keep them in the study is give them different ways to participate. So if they move state, they can get telemedicine, they can get home care. So I think we've got to break this one down, but certainly recruitment firms do their job, and when they don't, they essentially haven't attracted patients into the top of the funnel, but they don't control anything outside of the moment they're passed over to the side. And I think that should be separated between the two. And that's Mark, and I finished ranting.
Can I just make one point? People don't realize the kind of asset, the network that they have and that they are sitting on. I would love to see more empowered patient organizations that are able to raise awareness among their networks, about clinical trials, get the right people with sustainability. They are struggling with income, with finances. It would be so important for patient organizations to realize that actually data is wealth. Data is. I know that right now there is maybe not that many good examples out there that could actually step in instead of CROs. But I would love to see more empowered patient organizations, really care for the patients and put them into in the right connections, make the right connections. Thank you.
Back on that for you. I really think we need to educate a lot of these nonprofits on the value of patient data as well. We have a lot of nonprofits in the space who aren't doing right by patients, and you see thousands of grassroots organizations starting up, really to try and fix those gaps that they have in their own healthcare. And what I think is important as we're looking at social media is that a lot of these people and patients were on Facebook and Instagram and all of those other things, but you're also bombarded by a million different targeted ads and different companies that may not have the right interests. So as you look to social media, I would really, be cautious, because there is a lot of misinformation and disinformation, and patient communities are already in a mistrust phase, and we really need to look at building those relationships with those communities. So thank you, Sophia. I think it was a great point. And I'm done. This is Christine.
Hi, I'm Consuli. I'm a faculty at MD Anderson Cancer Center, and we are working on lots of clinical trials. So when it comes to patient recruitment, right, I think there are several problems as I see it. One of them is all these criteria that has to be filled in, and all these recruitment agencies and stuff like that. But when we think about clinical trials and personalized medicine in the context of each individual patient is different, and then there has to be a framework that has to be built for lots of different patients with different comorbidities and things like that. So a computational infrastructure that can enrollment of patients, it's going to be different, because the current paradigm is like, we have certain drugs, we are trying to pull in a bunch of patients together into one category, and then obviously there is going to be a problem in following up and several other things that comes along the way. But what if we have different trajectory for each of these patients who undergo different types of therapies? Then it becomes a much powerful and a stronger framework, and that could.
If you have enough time, do you want to go first and jump in, and then we'll cover everybody else?
Yeah, sure. I've been listening to a lot of conversations, and gosh, I think the first thing that has kind of dawned on me as I think about the conversations I have with a lot of startups is we all have to stop thinking of trains, and automobiles, right? They're all different. And when we think about clinical research, being in a COVID vaccine trial like I just did, or like I'm currently in, is incredibly different from being in a cancer trial. They may as well be two different businesses, so to speak. And it's very different from a Parkinson's trial.
Absolutely hit the nail on the head. I think that is such a fantastic perspective, and I couldn't agree more. Great contribution.
Hi, my name is Selena, and I've been a monitor for a little over 6 years and working
especially minority community, and participating in a research trial, and of course how it's presented. And I think it starts back, when kids are in high school. Is pharma taking an initiative to offer internships and programs? What is pharma doing to support medical schools? It really needs to be taken into account. I'm interested to hear everyone's thoughts on that.
I know we did touch on it a little bit with a few people in the room, and it is a huge topic that we need to address. And I think the mistrust within the minority populations is huge. And my friend Michael is on stage as well. Mike, I'd love to give you a chance to see, and I should see Joe's back too.
Sure. Hey there. Thanks for having me up on stage. I know Joe, so I'm so glad that I get to speak after Joe because, Joe, you said a lot of what I wanted to say, plus there are many other things, but in my experience I'm a long-time chronic disease patient advocate and was also a care partner for my mother when she was alive. And I work in cybersecurity and run a national foundation and do a lot of work with BCORI as well. And, the experience of me trying to be, and I have a rare kidney disease, had a bunch of kidney transplants, been on dialysis. I'm like a very sought after recruited patient, right? And have another of other chronic conditions. And for some reason I'm losing my voice, but, the experience was completely different, right? And I'm so glad Joe said that between me being recruited into a trial and then as an adult versus another age, and then trying like hell to get my mom into a clinical trial. Okay, and I know a ton about this environment, but trying to get my mother who passed from ovarian cancer into a trial was like nothing else I ever experienced. And just knowing what I know within the system, it was impossible for me. Okay. And so I think that there's an entire side of this conversation that is lost out where we're saying it's all on the patient almost to be in a trial and why are patients not staying in trials? That is certainly a challenge, right? And marketing to patients, but there are a whole lot of other people that are literally dying to get into trials, right? And I agree, Joe, the experience of a COVID trial is extremely different. But for someone who's lost somebody trying to get into a trial, I also look at a lot of other types of programs where people can't get into trials. And so I haven't heard any of that, which is my first time in this room. The other thing I wanted to share with everybody is that I hope we don't consider data sort of as lightly as I've heard it talked about in this room. And I'm glad Christine mentioned some of the things she did. Given that I work in cybersecurity and sort of patient protection, patient data protection, privacy, I've worked in tech healthcare for a long time. I'm involved with a nonprofit that really focuses on protecting patient data, particularly as a collective, and not giving it away, right? In some sense, I want to say to this room, patients don't owe you anything. Okay, so maybe Christine might yell at me after this for saying that, but patients don't owe you their data, right? And patients don't, the community at large doesn't owe you their data through a data mining system, which I heard somebody mention much earlier in the conversation. And similarly to nonprofits, there's a great deal of trust that has to be built up. And those of us that work on protecting communities and patients and their data have a lot of issues with some of what was being said in this room. But I'm excited to hear a lot of some of the things I heard. And thanks, Christine, for speaking up about the sort of social targeting, which is a huge challenge, and I work to fight on in a group called the Light Collective. So look forward to hearing from all of you. I can stay on for another 10 minutes, but then everybody, it's pretty easy to find me if you want to connect. Thanks.
Michael, this is Michael, and I just want to thank you for bringing that up. I also just wanted to note to you that the same team, under Consuli Conversations, we run a clubhouse specifically around data dignity, and I think you'd be an outstanding, not only a contributor to that, but you may learn a great deal from that. So we'll be happy to get that information to you if you want to link into one of us. But thanks for those comments, because data sanctity and dignity is really a critical aspect of building trust here with these patients. This is Michael, and I'm done.
Thank you so much to both Michaels, actually, for these wonderful, wonderful points. This is Edie. I really appreciate all of you giving us your time today, your contribution, your ideas. This has just been, as always, a conversation I feel like could go on for quite some time, and I really appreciate us noting the difference in the patient's experience, the difference in the types of trials, and frankly, the different spaces in which we're all working, right? I mean, I know as each of you are speaking, it makes me think in different ways and reply in my own little regulatory compliance hole that I live in, right? And I know that this is very similar for each and every one of you, and so I can't say enough about how much we appreciate having you here today. What I would love to hear about, knowing that we're closing in on our last few minutes, is what types of conversation should we take this to for next month? We're always soliciting ideas from this group. Often our ideas are born out of these actual conversations, so perhaps a conversation toward data sanctity is what we need to focus on next. Perhaps there's other ideas, but I want to leave the floor open for just a few moments, and then I'll let Heather take us to the close. Thank you so much. This is Edie. I'm done speaking.
Hey Edie, it's Christine. I'd like to have some conversations about value and what collective data can actually be worth. I think that's a conversation that we kind of dance around is what is your value worth? And I would love to explore that more with all of you, but that's just my thoughts. And anyways, I'm done.
Hi, this is Joe. Despite what some of you might think of me, I'm actually a series of lots of failures. And one thing I failed at, I think in a meaningful way, was to help the industry begin to return trial data back to the individual patient. This is not done systematically. It's long overdue. And I'm not talking about all the exploratory things that people usually bring up when I say this thing, right? Everyone finds the outlying reason why this can't be done. I'm talking about, what's the mystery drug you took? How did you perform on the primary endpoint? AEs, labs, and vitals. How about we start there? And I'd love to really dig into why haven't we been doing this? Why can't we do this tomorrow?
I love that. That's great. Thank you. Does anybody, and Nadia, you've joined us. Did you have something you wanted to share?
Hi, everybody. Thanks for hosting this important conversation. I'm Nadia Breck, and I'm here in California. There was a topic earlier Selena had asked about education and maybe talking about clinical trials as a concept earlier, perhaps in grade school or high school, so getting the public awareness up. But I would love to have a conversation in this room just about competencies for clinical researchers and maybe more career-focused topics. I don't know if there's any burning questions around that would be of interest to this group, but I'd really love to talk about the skills for a next-generation clinical researcher and how we can start building those skills a little bit earlier before folks kind of get into the way we've always done it. So thanks for hosting the room.
Thank you, Nadia. That's great.
Yeah, I was just going to agree. I know that's something that Joe and I have talked a lot about, that there's really like new and emerging skills, that may not have been, considered in the past that are really useful, especially digital and technology types of skills, but also things that are just really being, softer skills, being open-minded, empathy, those kinds of things, understanding the patient perspective.
Fantastic. It's Heather here. Did anybody else have a suggestion for our one burning question for the next session before we start to close it?
This is Joe. I would just like to piggyback on that topic of the diversity in the workforce and educational training earlier than college or in college. I know we've got perhaps some Latinos in clinical research folks on the call, as well as the Black women in clinical research organizations. They're very much involved in the educational endeavor for clinical research training professionals, both at the professional level and probably making attempts to get knowledge about clinical trials out into the high schools. So I echo that it's a good topic, and those might be some groups that we could have some representation from on the stage. Thank you. This is Joe. I'm done.
Fantastic. Thanks, Joe. It sounds like a topic of interest. I saw some mics flashing there. Dr. Kanan, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, so I would rather, one of the topics that could be of interest is actually how to come up with a good design for clinical trials from a database and perspective, right? So I think that would be that could be one of the topics where we could brainstorm on how to design a good clinical trial centered around data.
Thank you. Well, I know we've gone a little bit longer than sometimes, but shorter than others. But I think we're getting close to wrapping up. Unless there's anybody else who had something they wanted to add to that. Christine, did you want to jump in before we close out?
No, I was just applauding. I thought this was a fantastic room, and the time went by way too quickly. So just always appreciate seeing all of your static smiling faces on my screen.
Fantastic. Thanks, Christine. Again, it's Heather here. This really has been a wonderful collection of contributors. I'm so glad.
Real quick, Heather.
Yeah, go ahead, Edie, please.
Oh, I was just going to add Sabine had joined the room, and I didn't know if she had one last comment for us before we wrapped up.
Oh, great.
Hi, it's Sabine. Can you hear me? I hope you can hear me. I just wanted to add, because you mentioned about the education and clinical trials, and it would be really interesting because it's been really interesting for me listening, and I'm currently finishing my master's, and I think it would be a really interesting topic about how to include clinical trials in educational programs, and also maybe some professionals could talk about how to start and get into this work environment and actually get a job in clinical trials, because and obviously it's different in every country, but I'm based in UK, and it is quite difficult because when you're really eager, but everyone's obviously wants 10 years experience, so I think that would be really interesting to kind of talk about the work opportunities and how to get into this, and then thank you. I'm Sabine, and I'm done speaking.
Fantastic. Thanks, Sabine. And Lisa, I think you might be our last contributor for our session today. Did you have some thoughts on this? Please go ahead.
Yeah. I joined late, and I heard Nadia and Sabine talking about introduction programs to younger students, and I think Bridget Chapital does this work. I think she runs an after-school program, and she has a great Twitter page and LinkedIn page where she's going into schools and talking about clinical research really early on. I think elementary age. She might even have some high school programs